The morning sun streamed through the windows of O'Hare International Airport as Captain James Reynolds sipped his black coffee in the crew lounge. At 43, with salt and pepper hair peeking out from under his captain's hat, he had the confident posture of someone who'd spent more than 15 years navigating the skies. His eyes, crinkled at the corners from years of scanning horizons, reviewed the flight plan for the day's journey from Chicago to San Francisco. "Should be smooth flying today," said his co-pilot Tom, closing his weather app. "Clear skies all the way to California." James nodded, but experience had taught him that clear skies didn't always mean smooth flights. The unpredictable element was never the weather, it was the people. As he walked through the terminal toward Gate C-17, rolling his small black suitcase behind him, James observed the usual airport scenes. Business people typing frantically on laptops, families caroling excited children, couples sharing earbuds. He loved this job, loved being responsible for safely carrying hundreds of people across the country. He took that responsibility seriously. Flight 2187 began boarding right on schedule. James stood near the jet bridge entrance, greeting passengers with a warm smile as they filed onto the Boeing 737. He liked to put faces to the names on his passenger list. It made the metal tube feel more human. Halfway through boarding, his trained ear caught something disruptive, loud hooting laughter and the sound of someone stumbling into a row of seats. Looking down the aisle, he spotted them, 4 young men, probably in their mid-20s, high-fiving and talking much louder than necessary. One wore a backward baseball cap and a bright neon tank top that showed off sleeve tattoos. Another had a scraggly beard and kept punching his friend's arm as they joked. "Watch it, man," complained an older gentleman as one of the guys bumped into his shoulder without apologizing. "Relax, Grandpa, we're just having fun," the tallest one replied, triggering another round of laughter from his friends. James watched as flight attendant Lily Chen handled the situation, her professional smile never wavering as she directed them to their seats in the middle of the aircraft. She caught James's eye as she welcomed them aboard, giving him a barely perceptible raised eyebrow. After years of flying together, they had developed a silent language. That look meant, "Keep an eye on these ones." James returned to the cockpit, running through his pre-flight checklist with practiced precision, but his mind kept returning to those 4 passengers. He'd seen their type before, young men who thought the rules didn't apply to them, who saw a plane as just another place to party rather than a shared space requiring mutual respect. Through the small cockpit window, he watched the final passengers board. The airport ground crew loaded the last bags into the cargo hold. Everything was on schedule, but something in his gut, that sixth sense pilots develop after thousands of flight hours, told him this trip might test his patience and skill in ways that had nothing to do with air currents or technical issues. "Final passenger count confirmed at 167, Tom announced, marking it on their flight log. "Including our 4 party boys," James replied, adjusting his headset. "Noticed them, did you?" Tom laughed. "Lily already radioed up. They tried to bring their own alcohol on board. She confiscated it at the door." James sighed. That's never a good sign. He flipped switches, preparing for pushback from the gate. "Let's hope they settle down once we're airborne." But as the engines hummed to life and the plane slowly backed away from the terminal, James couldn't shake the feeling that Flight 2187 was going to be anything but routine today. The Boeing 737 soared at 36,000 feet, cruising smoothly through clear blue skies. 2 hours into the 5-hour journey to San Francisco, most passengers had settled into the peaceful rhythm of long-distance travel. Some dozed with travel pillows tucked under their chins. Others worked quietly on laptops or watched movies on the small screens in front of them. A young mother had finally gotten her toddler to nap, relief written across her tired face. But the calm atmosphere was steadily being disrupted by growing noise from rows 23 and 24. "Hey! Another round over here," shouted the guy in the neon tank top, waving his empty cup at flight attendant Lily as she passed by with a tray of water for another passenger. "Sir, I think you've had enough for now. How about some coffee or water instead?" Lily suggested with a professional smile, her voice calm but firm. His friend with the scraggly beard snorted. "Come on, we paid good money for these tickets. What's the problem with having a few drinks?" A few was an understatement. Despite the flight crew's attempts to slow their consumption, the four friends had each downed 3 or 4 alcoholic beverages already. Their faces were flushed, their movements becoming sloppy, and with each drink, their voices grew louder and their language increasingly inappropriate. "That's what I'm talking about," boomed the tallest one after telling a crude joke that made an elderly woman across the aisle press her lips together in disapproval. A businessman in row 26 lowered his noise-canceling headphones. "Excuse me," he said, leaning forward. "Some of us are trying to work. Would you mind keeping it down a bit? Would you mind minding your own business?" Shut back the one with the backward cap, high-fiving his friend. 2 rows ahead, a father with 2 young children glanced back with concern, then turned and whispered something to his kids before reaching into their backpack for headphones. In the galley, flight attendant Lily spoke quietly with her colleague Mike. "They're getting worse. I've tried to switch them to non-alcoholic drinks, but they're getting pushy about it." Mike nodded. "I noticed. That tall one grabbed my wrist when I tried to take his empty cup earlier." "I think we should let the captain know what's happening," Lily said, preparing a fresh pot of coffee. When Lily returned to offer the group coffee instead of more alcohol, the one with the tattoos made his voice high-pitched, mimicking her. "How about some coffee instead, sir?" His friends burst into laughter. "What time do you get off work, sweetheart?" asked another, leaning into the aisle and looking her up and down. "I bet you're a lot more fun when you're not playing flight attendant." A college-aged girl sitting nearby rolled her eyes and put in earbuds, turning up her music to drown them out. Lily's smile never faltered, though it no longer reached her eyes. "I'll check back with you gentlemen later," she said, moving down the aisle to attend to other passengers. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was reviewing their approach into San Francisco when a message came through on the interphone. "Captain, it's Lily. We have a situation developing with 4 passengers in rows 23 and 24. They've had multiple alcoholic drinks and are becoming disruptive. Several passengers have complained about noise and inappropriate language." James exchanged a glance with Tom. "How bad is it? Do you feel unsafe?" "Not unsafe yet, but they're ignoring our requests to quiet down, and they're making other passengers uncomfortable. One of them tried to grab Mike's arm earlier." James frowned, considering his options. As captain, his primary responsibility was flying the aircraft safely, but he was also responsible for maintaining order in the cabin. He'd hoped the troublemakers would settle down after takeoff. "Keep monitoring the situation," he told Lily. "Serve them no more alcohol under any circumstances. If they become physically inappropriate or threatening, let me know immediately." "Copy that, Captain." As James returned to his flight instruments, he knew from experience that situations like this rarely improved on their own. The question wasn't if he would need to intervene, but when and how. Another hour passed, and the situation in the main cabin was rapidly deteriorating. The 4 troublemakers had moved beyond simply being noisy to actively interfering with the flight operations. Ding. Flight attendant Lily looked up to see the call button light illuminated over row 23. "Excuse me," she said to the elderly gentleman she was helping with his blanket. "I'll be right back." She made her way down the aisle to where the guy with the backward cap was grinning widely. "What can I help you with, sir?" she asked. "I need more ice," he said, shaking an empty cup. "Of course." Lily took his cup and returned moments later with fresh ice. She had barely reached the galley when... Ding! The same call button, the same passenger. "Yes, sir." She kept her voice pleasant despite her growing frustration. "This ice is melting too fast. Can I get more?" Behind her, a line was forming for the bathroom. A young woman holding a fussy baby looked exhausted. An older man with a cane was waiting to ask for assistance, but Lily was stuck dealing with trivial requests. Over the next 20 minutes, the call button from row 23 rang 7 more times. A napkin, then a pillow, then a complaint about the temperature, each request more frivolous than the last. "They're just messing with us now," Mike whispered to Lily as they crossed paths in the narrow aisle. "The one with the tattoos keeps timing how long it takes you to respond to the call button. They think it's hilarious." Flight attendant Anna, a 30-year veteran with gray streaks in her dark hair, was retrieving drinks from the forward galley when she noticed the tall troublemaker walking purposefully toward the first-class cabin. "Sir, may I help you find something?" she asked, stepping into his path. Just going to use the bathroom up front, he said, trying to step around her. I'm sorry, but we need you to use the lavatory in the main cabin. First-class facilities are reserved for first-class passengers. The man's friendly demeanor vanished. Are you saying I'm not good enough for your fancy toilet? The ones back there have lines. It's not about being good enough, sir. It's about the service passengers have paid for. I'd be happy to show you, Toe. This is ridiculous, he interrupted, his voice carrying through the cabin. Heads turned. A baby started crying. We've been treated like garbage this whole flight. No drinks, no service, and now I can't even take a leak. Anna remained calm. Sir, please lower your voice and return to your seat. There's a lavatory available in the rear of the aircraft right now. Instead of complying, the man turned toward the cockpit door. You know what? I'm done talking to you people. Get the pilot out here. I want to talk to whoever's in charge of this tin can. Passengers who had been trying to sleep now sat up straight, alarmed by the confrontation. Parents pulled children closer. A businessman in the front row stood up, as if ready to intervene if needed. Sir, the captain is busy flying the aircraft. I need you to return to your seat immediately, Anna said firmly, placing herself between him and the cockpit door. Not until someone takes our complaints seriously, he shouted. Back in rows 23 and 24, his friends were laughing and filming the scene on their phones, encouraging him. Tell them, Dave, stand your ground. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Tom heard the commotion even through the closed door. Captain, we have an escalating situation, came Lily's voice over the interphone. One passenger is refusing to leave the forward area and demanding to speak with you. His friends are disrupting service by repeatedly pressing the call button and filming other passengers without consent. Several customers have asked to be reseated away from them. James took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. The behavior had clearly crossed from merely annoying to potentially dangerous. Flight attendants couldn't perform their safety duties while dealing with deliberate disruptions. And a passenger approaching the cockpit and making demands was a serious security concern. Tell me honestly, James asked. Do you think they're just being obnoxious, or is this becoming a safety issue? There was a slight pause before Lily answered. Both, Captain, and it's getting worse by the minute. Captain James Reynolds rubbed his forehead as he processed Lily's report. The airplane hummed steadily around him, 36,000 feet above the Earth's surface. Outside the cockpit windows, puffy white clouds dotted an endless blue sky. It was a perfect day for flying, except for what was happening behind the cockpit door. What do you think? James asked Tom, who had been listening to the exchange. By the book, we have options, Tom replied, flipping through the airline's operations manual. We can continue to have the flight attendants manage it, issue a formal warning through the cabin crew, divert to the nearest airport, or... He hesitated. Or what? James prompted. Or you could speak to them directly. But that's unusual mid-flight. James knew the protocol well. Pilots rarely left the cockpit during flight except for bathroom breaks. The captain's place was behind the controls, especially when there was trouble in the cabin. That's why flight attendants were trained to handle disruptive passengers. But this situation was escalating despite the crew's best efforts. James glanced at his watch. They were still 2.5 hours from San Francisco. The behavior would likely get worse, not better. What about diverting? Tom asked, already checking the navigation system. Salt Lake City is about 40 minutes away. James considered it. Diverting would mean landing at an unplanned airport, arranging new connections for 163 innocent passengers, filing mountains of paperwork, and creating a cascade of delays throughout the airline's network. All because of 4 troublemakers. He thought about the family with young children he greeted during boarding, the elderly couple celebrating their anniversary with a trip to see their grandchildren, the businessman who had mentioned how important his meeting in San Francisco was. Let me check our fuel situation, James said, reviewing their numbers. They had plenty of reserve fuel for an unplanned landing, but diverting would be a last resort. The interphone buzzed again. Captain, Anna here. The passenger has returned to his seat, but he's telling everyone within earshot that the crew is discriminating against his group. They're getting other passengers riled up. James made his decision. Tell Lily I need to speak with her at the cockpit door. A minute later, Lily slipped into the cockpit, closing the door behind her. Her uniform was perfectly pressed despite the chaos she'd been managing, but James could see the strain in her eyes. "How bad is it really?" he asked. "Bad," she admitted. "They're turning it into a show now, playing to an audience. One of them knocked a drink into a woman's lap and laughed about it. They're filming people who complain about them. I've had 3 passengers ask to be reseated, but we're full." James nodded slowly. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm coming out." Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "You're leaving the cockpit?" "Just for a few minutes. Tom can handle the aircraft." He turned to his first officer. "I'll keep it brief." Tom looked uncertain. "Are you sure that's the best approach? Once you engage directly, there's no going back. If they don't respond well, then we divert," James said firmly. "But I'm not punishing everyone on this plane if I can avoid it." James had seen other captains handle similar situations in different ways over the years. Some hid in the cockpit, letting their crew deal with the fallout. Others radioed ahead for law enforcement to meet the plane, which sometimes made the situation worse as troublemakers panicked or became more defiant. He'd been flying long enough to trust his instincts. Something told him these weren't hardened criminals, just immature young men who'd never faced real consequences for their behavior. "Prepare the cabin for my arrival," James told Lily. "I don't want to make a scene." "What are you planning to do?" she asked. James stood up, straightening his uniform jacket and captain's hat. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves caught the light from the cockpit window. "I'm going to talk to them," he said simply, "human to human." "And if that doesn't work?" Tom asked, already taking primary control of the aircraft. James' expression was determined. "Then we land in Salt Lake City, and they become someone else's problem." He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself. In 15 years of commercial flying, he'd left the cockpit to address passengers exactly twice. Both times had been successful, but both times had been tense. "Radio ahead to the company," he instructed Tom. "Let them know we have a situation we're managing. Have Salt Lake standing by as an alternate, just in case." With a final glance at his instruments, Captain Reynolds prepared to face the troublemakers who thought they could take over his airplane. The cockpit door opened with a soft click that somehow echoed through the entire aircraft. Passengers who had been dozing jerked awake. Those watching movies removed their headphones. A collective hush fell over the cabin as Captain James Reynolds emerged. At 6'3" with broad shoulders filled out by years of staying fit, despite a job that kept him seated for hours, James cut an impressive figure in his crisp navy uniform. Silver streaks in his dark hair caught the cabin lights as he adjusted his captain's hat. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves gleamed, symbols of authority earned through thousands of flight hours and rigorous training. He didn't rush. With deliberate steps, he moved down the aisle, nodding politely to passengers who stared in surprise. Pilots rarely appeared in the cabin during flight, and everyone knew it. "Is everything okay?" whispered a nervous woman clutching her paperback book. "Everything's fine, ma'am," James assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The troublemakers hadn't noticed him yet. They were still laughing among themselves, the one with tattoos mimicking Lily's walk while his friends snickered. The tall one was arguing loudly with a passenger across the aisle. "Look, buddy, if you don't like noise, you shouldn't fly commercial. Get your own private jet." He punched his friend's arm. "Right, Dave." James stopped at row 23. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there, one hand resting on the overhead bin. It took several seconds for the 4 men to register his presence. The guy in the backward cap noticed first, his laughter dying in his throat. He nudged his friend with the scraggly beard, who looked up and froze mid-sentence. One by one, they fell silent, suddenly face to face with the authority figure they'd been mocking from a distance. Passengers nearby watched with undisguised interest. An older man smirked slightly, clearly pleased to see the troublemakers confronted. A mother with 2 children leaned forward, ready to cover young ears if necessary. "Gentlemen," James said, his voice calm but carrying easily throughout the now silent cabin. His tone wasn't angry or confrontational, just steady and confident. "I'm Captain Reynolds." The tall one tried to maintain his bravado. "We having some kind of problem here, Captain." He emphasized the title with a hint of mockery, but his voice lacked its previous volume. "That's what I'd like to discuss with you," James replied evenly. He glanced at the empty seats across from them. "May I?" Without waiting for permission, he motioned for the flight attendant to pull down the jump seat, the small fold-down seat flight attendants use during takeoff and landing. This put him directly across the aisle from the four men, at eye level. The move surprised everyone. Captains didn't sit with passengers, especially not troublemakers. They made announcements over the PA system or sent messages through the flight attendants. They certainly didn't place themselves within arm's reach of disruptive individuals. The four men exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. They'd anticipated threats, maybe being told to shut up, possibly even handcuffs from an air marshal, reactions that would have given them something to push against, to feel righteous about. But the captain sitting down to talk. This was unfamiliar territory. "What's this about?" asked the one with tattoos, trying to sound tough though his voice had dropped to almost a normal volume. "That's exactly what I was going to ask you," James said, leaning forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. "Because from where I sit, usually up there," he nodded toward the cockpit, "it seems like you gentlemen are having some kind of problem with my aircraft or my crew." The one with the backward cap shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Up close, James could see they were younger than he'd initially thought, maybe early 20s at most. The smell of alcohol lingered around them, but their eyes were clear enough. They weren't fall-down drunk, just showing off. "We're just trying to have a good time," said the tall one, Dave. "Your flight attendants keep giving us a hard time about it." James nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this perspective. "I see. And would you say that your good time is more important than the comfort and safety of the other 163 people on this aircraft?" The directness of the question caught them off guard. The one with the scraggly beard looked down at his hands. Another glanced around, suddenly aware of all the eyes watching them. For the first time since boarding, the four troublemakers seemed to realize they weren't the main characters in this story, just disruptive extras in everyone else's journey. The airplane cabin remained eerily quiet. Passengers who normally would have been watching movies, reading, or sleeping were now fully focused on the scene unfolding in rows 23 and 24. Even the baby who had been fussy earlier seemed to sense the tension, quietly playing with a stuffed animal. Captain Reynolds settled more comfortably into the jump seat. His posture was relaxed but dignified, a stark contrast to the increasingly uncomfortable-looking troublemakers. "You know," James began conversationally, his voice warm enough to surprise the four young men, "I was about your age when I started flying commercially." The guy with tattoos blinked in confusion. This wasn't the lecture they'd been bracing for. "Back then, I thought I knew everything," James continued. "I was a hotshot pilot, fresh out of training with perfect scores. Couldn't tell me nothing." Dave, the tall one, shifted in his seat. "Look, if you're gonna lecture us." "Not a lecture," James interrupted smoothly. "Just a story. One I think you might find interesting." He glanced out the window at the clouds passing below. "On my third commercial flight ever, I was the co-pilot. We had this captain, older guy, Vietnam vet, been flying forever. Real by-the-book type." The four men exchanged glances, unsure where this was going. "Anyway," James went on, "I decided the weather reports were overblown. I checked the radar myself and thought we could save fuel by taking a more direct route than what was planned. I argued with the captain about it. When he stuck to the flight plan, I made some snide remarks over the headset that I thought only the other pilots could hear." He shook his head, smiling slightly at the memory. "Turns out I'd left the cabin channel open. Every passenger heard me mouthing off about the captain's excessive caution and old-school thinking." The guy with the scraggly beard actually chuckled at this before catching himself. "Yeah, pretty embarrassing," James acknowledged. "After we landed, I was sure my career was over before it started. The captain called me into his office, and I was ready to be reported to the airline." James paused, noting that he now had their full attention. "But he didn't report me. Instead, he sat me down, kind of like this, and explained something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Reynolds, an airplane isn't just a machine. It's a community in the sky. For a few hours, we're all stuck together in this metal tube, breathing the same air, sharing the same fate. Your job isn't just to fly the plane, it's to keep the community safe. And a community only works when everyone understands they're part of something bigger than themselves.'" James looked directly at each of the four men in turn. Today, I'm offering you the same opportunity that Captain gave me, a chance to reset without permanent consequences. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a printed copy of federal aviation regulations regarding interference with flight crew members. He unfolded it carefully. It states that passengers who interfere with a crew member's duties can face fines up to $35,000 and federal criminal charges that carry prison time. The one with the backward cap swallowed hard. For real? For real, James confirmed. And I have the authority to have law enforcement meet this plane when we land. The mood among the four men darkened visibly. Dave opened his mouth as if to argue but thought better of it. But here's the thing, James continued, his tone softening again. I don't think you're bad people. I think you're just having fun without considering how it affects others. He gestured around the cabin. That elderly couple in row 17. They're flying to meet their first grandchild. The woman in 32B. She's a doctor who just finished a 48-hour shift and needs to sleep. The family with the baby? Parents are stressed enough without adding to their burden. The guy with tattoos glanced back at the family, looking slightly ashamed. And my crew, James added. They're trained professionals trying to do their jobs. When you press that call button repeatedly for no reason, you're not just annoying Lily, you're potentially preventing her from helping someone with a genuine emergency. When you try to enter areas of the plane you're not ticketed for, you're creating a security concern that we have to take seriously in today's world. James let that sink in, giving them a moment to process his words. Several passengers nearby nodded in agreement. So here's what I'm proposing, he said finally. We still have 2 hours together in this aluminum tube. He smiled slightly. Let's make it pleasant for everyone. You can enjoy your flight, chat at a reasonable volume, and we can all get to San Francisco without further incidents. He waited a beat before adding, or I can make a call to have authorities meet us at the gate. And trust me, getting arrested at the airport makes for a terrible end to any trip. The four troublemakers exchanged looks. It wasn't a subtle threat, it was a straightforward choice with clear consequences. We've got complimentary soft drinks, juice, water, James offered, extending an olive branch. And Lily makes the best coffee in the sky. What do you say we start fresh? For the first time since they'd boarded, the four young men were completely quiet, facing a moment of decision that was entirely in their hands. Dave, the tall one who had been the unofficial leader of the troublemakers, was the first to break the silence. He rubbed his hand over his face and sighed deeply. Look, we didn't mean to cause actual problems, he said, his voice quieter than it had been all flight. We were just having fun. Captain Reynolds nodded. I understand. But there's a big difference between having fun and creating problems for everyone else. The guy with tattoos glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom quickly looked away, pretending they hadn't been watching the interaction. Didn't realize we were being so loud, he mumbled. Yeah, right, someone whispered from a few rows back, just loud enough to be heard. I think you did know, James said, his tone not accusatory but matter of fact. But sometimes when we're with friends, we get caught up in our own world. We forget there are other people with their own needs and concerns. The one with the scraggly beard nodded slowly. My mom always says I don't have an indoor voice. A few passengers chuckled, breaking some of the tension. I'll tell you what, James continued. I need to get back to the cockpit. We'll be starting our descent into San Francisco in about an hour. How about we all agree to a fresh start for the rest of the flight? Hey, Captain, I just wanted to say, thanks for not having us arrested. James nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. I got mine once. That story you told about your mistake when you were younger, was that real? Asked the one with the tattoos. Every word, James confirmed. We've all messed up. The question is what we learn from it. The guy with the backward cap, who had been the quietest since the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. My dad's a truck driver. He always says that when you're responsible for getting people from place to place, it's not just about the vehicle. It's about the lives you're carrying. Your dad sounds like a wise man, James said, genuinely impressed. As they walked